Lauren and I had always seemed like the perfect couple, the kind others envied. We met in college, two bright-eyed psychology majors bonding over a shared fascination with the intricacies of the human mind. From the moment I first saw her, her chestnut hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the lecture hall, I was captivated. Our connection was instant, electric. We'd stay up all night debating theories of consciousness, Freud versus Jung, the nature of dreams and desires. She had a way of illuminating the world, casting everything in a new light. With Lauren, I felt seen, understood in a way I never had before. We married young, starry-eyed, and convinced we'd defy the odds. I still remember the way she looked on our wedding day, her smile outshining the sunlight filtering through the chapel windows. Ethan stood beside me as best man, his grin a mirror of my own joy. Our friendship had always been a constant, a bedrock in my life as resolute as the vows I spoke. In the early years, Lauren and I were inseparable. We'd spend weekends exploring the city, trying hole-in-the-wall restaurants and wandering through art galleries. She'd point out the brushstrokes in a painting, revealing hidden depths I'd overlooked. Together, we traveled the world, marveling at ancient ruins and immersing ourselves in exotic cultures. When our careers began to take off, mine in advertising, hers in corporate law, we celebrated each other's successes. Late nights at the office were met with understanding, a shared commitment to building the life we'd always dreamed of. Looking back, I realize how much I took for granted. The ease of our conversations, the comfortable silences, the certainty that she'd always be my safest harbor. I never questioned her love, never doubted the strength of the bond we'd forged. But as the years went by, the demands of our professional lives slowly chipped away at the foundation of our relationship. Dinners together grew less frequent, replaced by hastily microwaved meals eaten in front of glowing laptop screens. Weekends once spent exploring became a blur of errands and obligations. The first whisper of doubt crept into my mind on an ordinary Thursday evening. I stood at the kitchen sink, hands submerged in sudsy water as I methodically washed the dishes, my thoughts far from the present moment. Outside the window, long shadows stretched across the backyard, the fading light mirroring the dimming of my own certainty. 7:38 p.m. I glanced at my watch and felt the now all too familiar tightness in my chest. Lauren was late again, the third time this week. She'd promised to be home by 6 o'clock for dinner with my best friend Ethan and his wife Mia, but the clock ticked on with no sign of her. As I stacked plates in the drying rack, my mind churned, analyzing recent memories with a new lens of suspicion. Lauren's behavior had shifted lately in ways I couldn't quite pinpoint. She seemed distracted, often lost in thought with her phone clutched like a lifeline. More than once I'd walked into a room to find her hastily ending a call, her expression unreadable. I tried to push the thoughts away, to summon the trust that had always been the bedrock of our relationship. Lauren and I had built a life together based on honesty, on the assurance that we would always be each other's safe haven. The notion that she could be keeping something from me felt like a betrayal in itself. The screen door creaked open, jolting me from my reverie. Lauren breezed in, her face flushed and a brittle smile plastered on. "Sorry I'm late," she offered, brushing a kiss across my cheek. "Got held up at work again." I studied her face, searching for cracks in the facade. Her eyes met mine briefly before darting away. In their depths I saw a flicker of something that made my stomach clench. Guilt? Anxiety? I couldn't be sure. The questions burned on my tongue, but I swallowed them back. Ethan and Mia would be here any minute. I couldn't let them sense the tension simmering beneath the surface of our picture-perfect life. "No worries," I replied, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "Dinner's in the oven. You've got time to change before they get here." She flashed me a grateful smile and hurried upstairs. I watched her retreating back, a heaviness settling in my chest. When had this distance crept between us? When had her presence begun to feel more like a shadow than a source of warmth? As I took the lasagna from the oven, the rich scent did little to ease the tightness in my gut. Seeds of doubt had sprouted, their tendrils curling insidiously around the trust one had always considered unshakable. I couldn't yet define it, this shift in the tectonic plates of our relationship. All I knew was that I suddenly found myself on unsteady ground, the cracked spiderwebbing beneath my feet. The doorbell rang, heralding Ethan and Mia's arrival. I plastered on a smile and went to greet our guests, pushing down the unease that threatened to choke me. As their cheerful voices filled the house, I couldn't shake the sense that I was standing on the precipice of something I couldn't yet comprehend, that the woman I loved was slipping away from me in intangible but undeniable ways. In that moment, I desperately wished to rewind time, to return to the security of blind faith. But as Lauren descended the stairs, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, I knew with sinking certainty that our perfect world had already begun to fracture. I just didn't yet know how deep the cracks would run. The days following that uneasy dinner bled together, each interaction with Lauren laced with a new undercurrent of suspicion. I found myself scrutinizing her every word, every gesture, searching for clues to the unease that gnawed at my gut. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table poring over client proofs, Lauren walked in, her face pale and eyes rimmed with red. She held her phone in a white-knuckled grip, her hands trembling slightly. "David, I need to tell you something," she began, her voice thick with emotion. My heart stuttered in my chest. This was it, the moment I'd been simultaneously dreading and craving. The truth, however painful, had to be better than this endless cycle of doubt and uncertainty. I set down my pen, steeling myself for the blow. "What is it, Lauren?" She drew a shaky breath, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's my mom. She's in the hospital. They think it's a stroke." For a moment I sat stunned, the weight of her words crashing over me like a tidal wave. Shame burned through me, hot and acrid. All this time, I'd been consumed with suspicions, reading sinister intent into every inconsistency, when the reality was something far more devastating. I was on my feet in an instant, pulling Lauren into my arms. She clung to me, her body shaking with sobs. In that moment, the distance between us evaporated, replaced by a shared anguish. "I'm so sorry, love," I murmured into her hair, my own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "We'll get through this together. I'm here for you, always." Over the next few days, our lives revolved around hospital visits and hushed conversations with doctors. Lauren's mother had indeed suffered a massive stroke, her prognosis uncertain. I watched as my wife shouldered the burden of decision-making, her strength both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking. In the sterile hallways of the ICU, the doubts that had plagued me seemed petty, insignificant. How could I have let my mind run wild with baseless accusations when Lauren was facing the possible loss of a parent? But even as I chastised myself, a small, insidious voice whispered in the back of my mind. Could this tragedy be masking something else? Was Lauren's distress solely due to her mother's condition, or was there a deeper grief she wasn't revealing? I tried to silence the thoughts, to focus on being the supportive husband Lauren needed. But in the quiet moments, when exhaustion pulled her into fitful sleep, I found myself once again turning over the inconsistencies, the nagging sense that something still wasn't quite right. Late one night, as I sat by Lauren's mother's bedside, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, my phone vibrated with an incoming message. I glanced at the screen, expecting a work email or concern from a friend. Instead, I found myself staring at a message from an unknown number. The preview text sent a chill racing down my spine. "We need to talk about Lauren. There's something you should know." My hands shook as I opened the message, a sense of foreboding settling like a leaden weight in my stomach. The sender claimed to have information about my wife, hinting at secrets and betrayals I could scarcely fathom. As I read on, bile rose in my throat, each word a dagger to my already fractured heart. The message spoke of late-night rendezvous, of passionate embraces captured in grainy photographs. And at the center of it all, a name that sent my world tilting off its axis: Ethan. I felt as if I'd been plunged into icy water, my breath seizing in my chest. It couldn't be true. Not Ethan, my best friend, the man who'd stood beside me at the altar. The man who knew me better than anyone, save Lauren herself. But even as I tried to deny it, the pieces began to fall into place with sickening clarity. The hushed phone calls, the furtive glances, the way Lauren's eyes had darted away whenever Ethan's name was mentioned. I looked at my wife, her face peaceful in sleep, and felt a chasm open up inside me. How could she do this? How could they both betray me in the cruelest way imaginable? Tears burned my eyes as I sat in the dimly lit hospital room, the steady beep of the monitors a mocking reminder of the life I thought I'd built. In a matter of minutes, everything I'd believed about my marriage, my friendships, my very identity, had been called into question. I knew I should confront Lauren, demand answers and accountability. But with her mother's life hanging in the balance, I couldn't bring myself to add to her burden. So I sat in silence, the weight of betrayal crushing my chest, as the woman I loved slept on, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. In that moment, I felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of shattered trust and bitter realizations. The future I'd envisioned, the happily ever after Lauren and I had promised each other, now seemed like a cruel mirage, taunting me with its impossibility. As dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale light through the hospital windows, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth, no matter how painful. I would confront the lies and deceit that had infected the very foundation of my life. But even as resolve hardened within me, I couldn't escape the aching sense of loss, the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. My world had irrevocably shifted, the ground beneath my feet now as unsteady as my once unshakable belief in the love Lauren and I shared. In the harsh light of betrayal, I hardly recognized myself, or the life I'd so painstakingly built. The road ahead stretched before me, dark and uncertain. But one thing remained crystal clear: the truth, however devastating, could no longer be ignored. It was time to face the reality of who my wife and best friend really were, and the shattered illusion of the life I'd thought was mine. Here is Part 4, continuing the story in the tone and style you specified. Part 4, Unraveling Truths. The message haunted me, its implications seeping into every crack and crevice of my consciousness. Each time I closed my eyes, the damning words flickered behind my eyelids, taunting me with the magnitude of their revelation. As Lauren and I navigated the uncertain terrain of her mother's recovery, I found myself living a dual existence. Outwardly, I was the dutiful husband, offering comfort and support in the face of an unimaginable crisis. But internally, a tempest raged, a relentless churning of questions and doubts that threatened to consume me. I couldn't reconcile the woman I'd loved for so long, the partner I'd trusted implicitly, with the specter of betrayal that now loomed over our lives. Each interaction with Lauren took on a new layer of complexity, my senses heightened to every flicker of emotion across her face, every subtle inflection in her voice. Did her touch linger a moment too long when she brushed past Ethan in the hospital corridor? Were their shared glances imbued with a secret understanding, a language of intimacy that I'd been too blind to see? The questions gnawed at me, an insidious poison that seeped into the marrow of my being. Yet even in the midst of my turmoil, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of guilt. Lauren was facing the possible loss of her mother, her world fracturing in ways I could scarcely comprehend. What kind of husband was I to let suspicion overshadow her pain, to prioritize my own wounds over her immeasurable loss? I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the immediate needs of our shattered reality. But in the quiet moments, when the sterile hum of hospital machinery filled the air and Lauren's eyes glazed over with exhaustion, the doubts crept back in, insidious and unrelenting. The photographs mentioned in the message danced behind my eyes, taunting me with their existence. Part of me longed to confront Lauren, to lay bare the evidence of her betrayal and demand an explanation. But another part, the part that still clung desperately to the illusion of our life together, recoiled at the thought of shattering the fragile détente we'd established. And then there was Ethan. My best friend, my confidant, the man who'd been a constant presence in my life for as long as I could remember. The thought of him entwined with Lauren, their bodies and souls entangled in a web of deceit, sent a visceral pain slicing through my chest. I recalled the countless times I'd poured my heart out to him, sharing my deepest fears and insecurities. Had he been silently mocking me, laughing at my obliviousness as he betrayed me in the most intimate way possible? The very idea made bile rise in my throat, a searing ache that no amount of rationalizing could quell. As the days bled into weeks and Lauren's mother's condition stabilized, I found myself growing increasingly distant, retreating into a labyrinth of my own making. Conversations with Lauren took on a stilted quality, each word measured and guarded, as if we were two actors reciting lines in a play whose ending we already knew. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the office in a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating reality of my unraveling marriage. But even there, the specter of betrayal followed me, coloring every interaction with a sickening sheen of doubt. Late one evening, as I sat hunched over my desk, the harsh glow of the computer screen casting shadows across my face, a knock at the door jolted me from my reverie. I glanced up to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his expression inscrutable. "Hey, man. I thought you might still be here," he said, his voice too casual, too familiar. I felt a surge of anger course through my veins, hot and explosive. How dare he stand there, acting as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't ripped the very foundation of my life to shreds? But even as the fury threatened to consume me, I found myself paralyzed, unable to confront the man who had once been my closest confidant. The words lodged in my throat, a bitter tangle of accusation and despair. "Just finishing up some work," I managed, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. Ethan nodded, his gaze lingering on me for a moment too long. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of guilt, of unease, that sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing over me. "Listen, David." He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I know things have been tough lately, with Lauren's mom and everything. I just wanted to say that I'm here for you, man. Always." The irony of his words was like a knife twisting in my gut. Here for me? He'd been there all right, in my wife's bed, in the secret recesses of her heart that I'd once believed belonged solely to me. I swallowed back the bitter retort that danced on the tip of my tongue, instead forcing a tight smile. "Thanks, Ethan. I appreciate it." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth, but I couldn't bring myself to voice the truth. Not yet, not when the wounds were still so raw, the betrayal so fresh. Ethan lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to say more. But when I remained silent, he simply nodded, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he turned and walked away. I watched him go, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. The man I'd once trusted with my life now felt like a stranger, a specter of deceit wearing the face of my dearest friend. As the door clicked shut behind him, I buried my face in my hands, hot tears burning behind my closed eyelids. The reality of my shattered world pressed down on me, an unbearable weight that threatened to crush me beneath its unrelenting force. I knew I couldn't go on like this, living in the shadows of suspicion and betrayal. I needed answers, needed to confront the truth that had been lurking just beneath the surface of my carefully constructed life. But even as resolve hardened within me, I couldn't escape the aching sense of loss, the knowledge that the path ahead would be paved with pain and heartbreak. Lauren and I had promised each other forever, but now the very foundation of our love had been called into question, the trust we'd spent years building now as fragile as spun glass. I rose from my desk, my limbs heavy with the weight of the task before me. As I stepped into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loneliness, a hollow ache that seemed to permeate every fiber of my being. But I knew I couldn't turn back, couldn't retreat into the comforting illusion of ignorance. The truth, however devastating, demanded to be uncovered. And so I set forth into the unknown, my heart a shattered remnant of the love I'd once believed unbreakable. The road ahead stretched before me, dark and uncertain, but I knew that I had no choice but to follow it to its inevitable end. Even if it meant facing the bitter reality of my wife's betrayal, of my best friend's ultimate deception. Even if it meant watching the life I'd so carefully built crumble to dust before my very eyes. The truth, however painful, could no longer be denied. And I would stop at nothing to uncover it, no matter the cost. Here is part 5 incorporating the trip with flirtatious undertones while continuing to withhold explicit revelation of the affair. Part 5. Shadows and Silhouettes. The idea of a weekend getaway had seemed like a lifeline, a desperate attempt to recapture the ease and intimacy that had once been the cornerstone of our marriage. Lauren had suggested it tentatively, her eyes searching mine for a flicker of the connection we'd once shared. "It might be good for us," she'd murmured, her hand ghosting over my arm. "A chance to reconnect, away from the stress of everything." I'd agreed, clinging to the fragile hope that perhaps distance could mend the fractures that had splintered our relationship. And so we found ourselves on the winding roads leading to the mountains, the car filled with a silence that felt almost tangible. Ethan and Mia had eagerly accepted our invitation, their presence a buffer against the tension that crackled between Lauren and me. As the miles slipped by, I found my gaze drawn to the rearview mirror, watching the subtle interactions between my wife and my best friend. They sat close together, their shoulders brushing with each turn of the road. Mia chatted animatedly, her laughter ringing out in the confined space, but I couldn't help but notice the way Ethan's eyes lingered on Lauren, the way his hand rested just a fraction too long on her knee when he leaned in to share a joke. The unease that had taken root in my gut blossomed into something darker, more insidious. Each casual touch, each whispered exchange, felt like a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I tried to tell myself that I was being paranoid, that the stress of the past few weeks had left me raw and overly sensitive. But as we arrived at the secluded cabin, the air crisp with the promise of autumn, I couldn't shake the sense that something fundamental had shifted between the four of us. The easy camaraderie that had once flowed so naturally now felt strained, each interaction laced with unspoken tension. As we settled into our rooms, Lauren's gaze met mine across the expanse of the bed. For a fleeting moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the warmth, the tenderness that had once been my anchor. But then it was gone, replaced by a shuttered expression that I couldn't quite read. "I'm going to take a walk," she said softly, her fingers pleating the edge of the comforter. "Clear my head a bit." I nodded, swallowing back the questions that bubbled up in my throat. As the door clicked shut behind her, I felt a rush of exhaustion sweep over me, the weight of the past few months pressing down on my chest. I must have drifted off, for when I opened my eyes the room was cast in shadows, the last rays of the setting sun filtering through the curtains. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and made my way downstairs. The cabin was quiet, almost eerily so. I peered into the living room, expecting to find Ethan and Mia curled up on the couch, but it was empty. A flicker of unease danced along my spine as I moved towards the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. And then I heard it, a low murmur of voices, coming from the back porch. I moved closer, my heart thudding against my ribcage as I strained to make out the words. "Can't keep doing this." Lauren's voice, barely audible over the rustling of the leaves. "It's not fair to him." "I know," Ethan's reply, rough with emotion. "But I can't help how I feel, Lauren. I've tried to fight it, but—" His words trailed off, swallowed by a rush of blood in my ears. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the doorframe so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The implication of their conversation crashed over me like a tidal wave, stealing the breath from my lungs. I wanted to burst through the door, to confront them with the evidence of their betrayal. But something held me back, a sickening sense of dread, a fear of shattering the last fragile remnants of the life I'd built. And so I stood there, listening to the murmured confessions of my wife and my best friend, each word a dagger to my already fractured heart. As the shadows lengthened and the chill of the evening seeped into my bones, I felt a hollow ache settle in my chest, the realization that the truth I'd been so desperate to uncover might be more devastating than I'd ever imagined. Lauren's voice, soft and tinged with regret, filtered through the haze of my thoughts. "We can't do this, Ethan. Not here, not like this. I need to talk to David, to figure out where we go from here." I heard the creak of the porch swing, the rustle of fabric as they stood. Panic surged through me, the fear of being caught eavesdropping, of having to face the reality of their betrayal head-on. I stumbled back from the door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. As I fled up the stairs, the weight of their words crushing my chest, I couldn't escape the sickening sense of inevitability that hung in the air. The truth had been laid bare, even if the words hadn't been spoken aloud. And now, in the suffocating stillness of the cabin, I knew that I could no longer hide from the reality of my shattered marriage, of the gaping wound that had been festering just beneath the surface of our carefully constructed lives. As I collapsed onto the bed, hot tears burning behind my closed eyelids, I felt a wave of grief wash over me, for the love I'd lost, for the trust that had been so carelessly discarded. The very foundation of my world had been ripped away, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty and pain. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know how I would find the strength to confront Lauren and Ethan, to untangle the web of lies and betrayal that had ensnared us all. But one thing was achingly, unequivocally clear: the life I'd once known, the love I'd cherished above all else, was irrevocably shattered. And in the haunting stillness of that moonlit room, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd ever be whole again. Here is part 6, continuing the story with a focus on emotional nuance, complex relationship dynamics, and the characters' inner psychological states. Part 6, Unspoken Truths. The morning sun slanted through the curtains, casting dappled shadows across the rumpled sheets. I lay still, feeling Lauren's warmth beside me, yet an aching chasm seemed to yawn between us. The words I'd overheard the night before echoed relentlessly in my mind, a discordant refrain against the soft cadence of her breathing. I studied her face in the half-light, tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbone, the fanning of her lashes against her skin. She looked peaceful, untroubled, a stark contrast to the tempest raging within me. How could she lie there, so serene, when our world was unraveling around us? Carefully, so as not to wake her, I slipped from the bed and padded downstairs. The cabin was quiet, the stillness broken only by the distant trilling of birds in the trees beyond the windows. I stood in the kitchen, my hands curled around a mug of coffee, staring out at the misty morning landscape without really seeing it. The night's revelations pressed against my chest, a leaden weight that made each breath an effort. Lauren's murmured confession to Ethan played on a loop in my head, the implication of her words like a knife twisting deeper with each repetition. And yet, even in the midst of my anguish, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt, an unsettling sense that perhaps I didn't have the full picture. The Lauren I knew, the woman I'd loved for so long, wasn't capable of such casual cruelty, of such a complete disregard for our marriage vows. But then again, whispered a traitorous voice in my mind, how well did I really know her? The past few months had been a master class in deception, in the artful concealment of truths too painful to face. If she could keep something like this hidden, what other secrets might she be harboring? The sound of footsteps on the stairs jolted me from my brooding. I turned to see Lauren entering the kitchen, her hair tousled from sleep, a soft smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The sight of her, so achingly familiar, sent a fresh wave of pain crashing over me. "Morning," she murmured, reaching for a mug from the cupboard. "Did you sleep okay?" I watched her, trying to reconcile the woman before me with the one I'd heard spilling her heart to another man in the darkness. She moved with an easy grace, her slender fingers wrapping around the mug, her lips pursing slightly as she blew on the steaming liquid. "Not really," I said, my voice sounding hollow to my own ears. "I had a lot on my mind." Lauren glanced at me, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Is everything all right? You seem distant." I almost laughed at the irony of her words. Distant? How could I be anything but, when the very foundation of our relationship had been ripped away, leaving me floundering in the wreckage? But I couldn't bring myself to voice the accusations that burned in my throat, to shatter the fragile equilibrium of the morning. Some part of me still clung to the desperate hope that I'd misunderstood, that there was some innocent explanation for the intimacy I'd witnessed between my wife and my best friend. "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile that fell brittle on my face. "It's been a long week." Lauren studied me for a moment, her gaze searching. For a fleeting instant, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, a shadow of the truth she'd been hiding. But then it was gone, replaced by a gentle concern that made my chest ache. "Why don't you go back to bed for a bit?" she suggested, her hand coming to rest on my arm. "I can take care of breakfast. You look like you could use the rest." I flinched at her touch, the warmth of her skin suddenly unbearable. How could she stand there, offering comfort and solace, when just hours before she'd been locked in a clandestine embrace with another man. But I couldn't let her see the fractures spiderwebbing through my composure, the barely contained anguish that threatened to spill forth at any moment. And so I simply nodded, mumbling a thanks as I slipped past her and headed back upstairs. In the quiet of our room, I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head cradled in my hands. The Lauren I'd seen downstairs, the one who radiated gentle concern and easy affection, was achingly familiar, the woman I'd fallen in love with, the one I'd pledged my life to. But now that image was tainted, marred by the knowledge of her betrayal. Every smile, every casual touch, felt like a carefully crafted lie, a mask meant to conceal the ugly truth lurking beneath the surface. I thought of Ethan, the man I trusted above all others. The memories of our friendship, once a source of comfort and joy, now felt like bitter ashes on my tongue. How long had he been coveting my wife, biding his time until the opportunity presented itself? Had every shared laugh, every heartfelt conversation, been nothing more than a smokescreen for his true intentions? The questions swirled in my mind, a relentless torrent that left me feeling battered and raw. I didn't know how to reconcile the life I'd believed in with the reality that had been laid bare in the moonlit stillness of the night. But I knew I couldn't go on like this, trapped in a limbo of uncertainty and doubt. I needed answers, needed to confront the betrayal head-on, no matter how painful the truth might be. Resolve hardened within me, a steely determination born of the shattered remnants of my trust. I would confront Lauren and Ethan, would demand the honesty that had been so glaringly absent from our interactions. Even if it meant watching the life I'd cherished crumble before my eyes, even if it meant facing the bitter reality of my wife's infidelity and my best friend's ultimate betrayal. The truth, however devastating, could no longer be ignored. And I would stop at nothing to uncover it, to piece together the jagged fragments of my fractured world and find a way to move forward, no matter the cost. With a heavy sigh, I pushed myself to my feet, squaring my shoulders against the weight of the task before me. The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, but I knew I had no choice but to follow it to its inevitable conclusion. For better or for worse, the secrets that had lurked beneath the surface of my marriage would soon be dragged into the unforgiving light of day. And I could only hope that when the dust settled, there would still be something left to salvage from the ruins. The morning unfolded with an aching normalcy, the routines of coffee and conversation flowing with a practiced ease that felt jarringly at odds with the turmoil roiling inside me. I watched Lauren move through the kitchen, her laughter at Mia's quips musical and unburdened. The dichotomy between her outer radiance and my inner anguish left me reeling, questioning the very nature of perception. How many times had I borne witness to this domestic tableau, secure in the certainty of my life's foundations? The recollection of bygone happiness, now irretrievably tainted, wrapped around my throat like barbed wire. Each casual touch between Lauren and Ethan, once unremarkable, now seared my senses with the branding iron of trespass. Breakfast tasted of ashes and deceit. I chewed mechanically, Lauren's gaze warmly enveloping me even as her foot grazed Ethan's beneath the table. Their secret language of lingering looks and barely perceptible nods, so glaringly evident in retrospect, mocked my obliviousness, painting me the fool in a drama of my own making. Excusing myself, I stumbled out onto the porch, the crisp autumn air a balm to my flushed skin. The riotous hues of the turning leaves, vibrant crimsons and golds, seemed to mock the lifeless wasteland my heart had become. Memories assailed me in a relentless barrage, moments of intimacy now warped and distorted in the funhouse mirror of betrayal. Our first dance as husband and wife, Lauren's eyes shimmering with emotion, had the seed of duplicity already taken root even then? The tender words whispered in the darkness of our bedroom, skin against skin, how cheapened they seemed now, knowing they may have been echoed in another's arms. Bob burned in my throat as images of Lauren and Ethan, limbs entangled in illicit passion, played across my mind in a lurid slideshow. The very thought of their hands on each other, marking territory that had once been solely my domain, ignited a fury that threatened to consume me whole. And yet, even as wrath coursed through my veins, I found myself ensnared in a web of self-doubt. What failing in me as a husband, as a man, had driven Lauren into the embrace of another? How had I been so blind, so woefully ill-equipped to perceive the disintegration of the most precious bond I'd ever known? These thoughts circled like carrion crows, feasting on the fetid remains of my self-worth. I saw myself through a dark mirror, diminished and wanting, undeserving of the love I'd once held as sacrosanct. The sting of emasculation, of having been unmanned in the eyes of my beloved, festered like a suppurating wound. The creak of the screen door shattered my spiraling ruminations. I turned to find Ethan framed in the doorway, his expression an inscrutable mask. A sudden urge to violence seized me, primal and all-consuming. The desire to rain blows upon his form, to annihilate the betrayer, pulsed through my bloodstream. But as quickly as it had surged, the impulse receded, supplanted by an aching hollow. What good would such base satisfaction serve, in the face of a loss so cataclysmic? No amount of retribution could rewind time, resurrecting the man I'd been in a world unacquainted with this anguish. Ethan regarded me warily, his posture tense. "David," he began, his baritone scraping like gravel. I held up a hand, forestalling the excuses I could see forming on his lips. "Don't," I bit out, the single syllable heavy with unspoken accusation. A shadow flickered across his features, the weight of guilt apparent in the furrowing of his brow. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. In the lengthening silence, the chasm between us gaped, a void where brotherhood had once dwelt. I searched his countenance for some glimmer of the boy I'd grown up alongside, the man who'd been my anchor through countless tempests. But the face before me was that of a stranger, a Judas cloaked in the vestments of camaraderie. Nausea gripped me anew as the full implications of his perfidy sank leaden talons into my psyche. Not only had the sanctity of my marriage bed been defiled, but the very fabric of my existence had been rent asunder. The two people I'd cherished above all others, the twin pillars upon which I'd constructed an identity, had colluded in the annihilation of all I held dear. A bitter laugh, more akin to a sob, tore from my chest. I drank in Ethan's stricken expression, deriving a twisted satisfaction from his apparent remorse. Let him marinate in the mire of his own making, choking on the toxic consequences of his actions. I brushed past him, shouldering my way back into the cabin. Blood thundered in my ears, nearly drowning out the surprised lilt of Lauren's voice as I stormed into the kitchen. Her eyes widened as they met mine, some primal instinct alerting her to the maelstrom of emotions radiating from my every pore. "David, what dash?" she began, but I silenced her with a slashing gesture. "Don't you dare," I snarled, barely recognizing the guttural rasp of my own voice. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend like everything is fine, like you haven't been ripping my heart to shreds with every lying breath." Lauren blanched, color draining from her face as if I'd physically struck her. Beside her, Mia looked on in mute horror, understanding dawning in her wide eyes. In the suffocating stillness, I could hear the ragged cadence of my own breathing, each exhalation a plea for absolution I knew would never come. I stood on the precipice of a life irrevocably altered, the shards of my shattered trust crumbling beneath my feet. And in that moment, confronted with the incontrovertible evidence of my betrayal, I felt a chilling clarity settle over me, sharp-edged and unforgiving. The path forward stretched ahead, a desolate landscape bereft of the solace of ignorance. I knew, with a certainty that sent icy tendrils slithering down my spine, that the only way out was through. Through the labyrinth of lies and deception, through the agonizing realization of a love defiled. Through the crucible of a reckoning long overdue, the cauterizing fire of a truth too searing to ignore. With a steadying breath, I fixed Lauren with a stare that could cut glass, every ounce of anguish and fury I'd harbored pouring forth in a torrent of accusation. "Tell me," I demanded, my voice deceptively soft, belying the tempest raging within. "Tell me everything." And as the first tear spilled down her ashen cheek, I steeled myself for the unraveling yet to come, the shattering of a reality I'd once held sacred. For in the harsh light of revelation, there could be no return to the blissful ignorance of before. Only a reckoning, raw and unrelenting. And the inescapable knowledge that nothing would ever be the same again. Here is the next part with Lauren's confession, written in the emotionally nuanced style you specified. Part 8. Shattered Illusions. The silence stretched between us, taut and suffocating, as Lauren's gaze darted around the room, desperately seeking escape from the intensity of my stare. I could see the panic rising in her eyes, the realization that the carefully constructed facade of our life together was crumbling before her. David, she began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, jagged and harsh. The truth would be a good start. She flinched as if I'd struck her, her shoulders curving inward in a gesture of defeat. In the periphery of my vision, I saw Ethan hovering in the doorway, his face a mask of guilt and trepidation. Lauren drew a shuddering breath, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her shirt. It started a few months ago, she whispered, each word a shard of glass embedding itself in my heart. Ethan and we didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. The air left my lungs in a rush, the confirmation of my worst fears a physical blow. I gripped the back of a chair, my knuckles turning white with the force of my anguish. Didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. You didn't mean to betray me, to shatter every vow we ever made? Tears spilled down Lauren's cheeks, glinting in the harsh light of the kitchen. I'm so sorry, David. I never wanted to hurt you. I got lost. We both did. I closed my eyes, images of Lauren and Ethan tangled together flashing behind my eyelids, searing my soul. The thought of their hands on each other, mapping the contours of skin that had once been mine alone to explore, sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. Lost? I spat, the word acid on my tongue. Is that what you call it? Getting lost in my best friend's arms, in his bed? Lauren flinched, a sob tearing from her throat. It wasn't like that. We never meant. Spare me the excuses. I cut her off, my voice raw with betrayal. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every lie, every stolen moment. You made a choice, Lauren. A choice to deceive me, to rip my heart out and dance on the shattered pieces. In the suffocating stillness, I could hear the ragged cadence of my own breathing, each exhalation a plea for a reality that had been brutally ripped away. I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath my feet with every revelation. I loved you, I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of my anguish. I trusted you with everything I had, with every part of me. And you threw it away like it meant nothing. Lauren shook her head, anguish etched into every line of her face. It wasn't like that, David. I do love you. I got lost in something I couldn't control. The way Ethan made me feel, it was like I was drowning and he was air. Each word was a twist of the knife in my gut, a reminder of how easily I had been replaced, how little I had truly meant. The memories of our life together, once a source of comfort and joy, now felt tainted, poisoned by the knowledge of her betrayal. And what about how I made you feel? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What about the promises we made, the life we built together? Did any of that ever truly matter to you? Lauren's shoulders shook with the force of her sobs, her face buried in her hands. Of course it mattered. It still matters. I don't know how to fix this, David. I don't know how to make it right. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat, the sound harsh and grating. You can't fix this, Lauren. You shattered us. You took the love I gave you and you twisted it into something unrecognizable. In the periphery of my vision, I saw Ethan take a step forward, his face a mask of remorse. David, I held up a hand, cutting him off. Don't you dare try to apologize, to act like this was some mistake. You were my best friend, Ethan. My brother. And you betrayed me in the worst way possible. The weight of the realization hit me then, a tidal wave of anguish and loss. The two people I had trusted above all others, the foundations upon which I had built my entire world, had colluded in the destruction of everything I held dear. I felt as if I were standing in the ruins of a life I no longer recognized, the ashes of my dreams swirling around me in a macabre dance. The future I had envisioned, the happily ever after I had clung to with every fiber of my being, had been ripped away, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty and pain. I can't do this, I whispered, my voice raw and broken. I can't be here, in this house, with these memories. I need to go. Lauren's head snapped up, panic flaring in her eyes. Go? David, please. We can talk about this, we can figure it out. But I was already moving, my feet carrying me towards the door, towards an escape from the suffocating reality of my shattered life. I could hear Lauren's pleas, Ethan's desperate apologies, but they faded into white noise drowned out by the roaring in my ears. I stumbled out into the cool air, gulping in desperate breaths as if I had been suffocating. The world around me felt surreal, the colors too bright, the edges too sharp. It was as if I had stepped into a nightmare, a twisted version of the life I had once known. And as I walked, no destination in mind, I felt the weight of my broken heart, the shards of my fractured trust, cutting into my soul with every step. The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, a landscape of uncertainty and pain. But one thing was achingly, unequivocally clear. The life I had cherished, the love I had held sacred above all else, lay shattered at my feet. And no matter how desperately I might try to gather the pieces, to fit them back together in some semblance of wholeness, the cracks would always remain. The weeks following Lauren's confession were a waking nightmare, each day a fresh descent into the abyss of despair. I moved through our once cherished home like a specter, haunted by the ghosts of laughter and whispered endearments, now twisted into mocking echoes of a love defiled. Lauren's presence was a constant reminder of the betrayal that had shattered the very foundation of our existence. Her eyes, once alight with affection and understanding, now held a wild, desperate gleam, as if the weight of her transgressions was slowly consuming her from within. I watched, helpless and aching, as she unraveled before my eyes, the once vibrant threads of her spirit fraying under the strain of guilt and self-recrimination. She paced the halls of our home like a caged animal, alternating between bouts of anguished weeping and eerie, unsettling calm. Late one night, I jolted awake to the acrid scent of smoke, tendrils of gray snaking beneath the bedroom door. Heart pounding, I stumbled from the bed, following the flickering orange glow that bathed the hallway in an otherworldly light. As I burst into the living room, the sight that greeted me stole the breath from my lungs. Flames licked at the curtains, the walls, the very foundation of the home we had built together. And there, in the center of the inferno, stood Lauren, her eyes reflecting the dancing blaze, her face a mask of eerie serenity. "Lauren!" I screamed, my voice raw with panic and disbelief. "What have you done?" She turned to me then, her gaze unfocused, as if peering through me to some distant horizon. "It has to burn," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of the flames. "The lies, the betrayal, the memories. It all has to burn." Horrified understanding dawned, a sickening realization of the depths of her unraveling. I lunged forward, intending to drag her from the conflagration, to save her from the manifestation of her own self-destruction. But she danced out of reach, a manic laugh bubbling from her throat. "Don't you see, David?" she cried, her voice rising in pitch, edged with hysteria. "This is the only way. The only way to purge the sin, to cleanse the stain of what I've done." The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking and blinding. I coughed, my eyes streaming, as I fought to reach her through the wall of flames. But Lauren remained just beyond my grasp, a haunting figure silhouetted against the raging inferno. "Please, Lauren," I begged, my voice cracking with desperation. "Please come with me. We can still fix this, still find a way." But even as the words left my lips, I knew they were a hollow platitude. The trust that had once been the bedrock of our love lay shattered, the pieces too jagged and sharp to ever fully mend. Lauren's eyes met mine through the shimmering haze, a flicker of lucidity surfacing briefly amidst the madness. "I'm sorry, David," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "I'm so sorry for everything." And with those final words, she turned and ran deeper into the heart of the blaze, her form quickly swallowed by the hungry, leaping tongues of fire. I screamed her name, the sound tearing from my throat, raw and anguished. But the roar of the inferno swallowed my cries, the heat driving me back, forcing me to stumble from the house, gagging on the acrid smoke. I watched, helpless and numb, as the home we had once shared was consumed by the flames, the crackle and hiss of the fire a macabre symphony to the ashes of our life together. The blaze painted the night sky in shades of orange and red, a hellish tableau that seared itself into my memory. It was there, standing on the lawn, the cold dew seeping into my bare feet, that the final realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Lauren, the woman I had loved more than life itself, was gone, consumed not just by the literal flames, but by the inferno of guilt and despair that had raged within her own mind. In the end, the betrayal had destroyed us both, leaving nothing but charred remnants and bitter ashes in its wake. The life we had built, the love we had once cherished, had been reduced to smoke and ruin, a cautionary tale of the devastating power of shattered trust. As the first wail of sirens pierced the night air, I sank to my knees on the damp grass, my body racked with sobs that seemed to emanate from the very depths of my being. The pain was beyond words, beyond comprehension, a searing, all-consuming anguish that left me hollowed out and raw. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never be the same. The scars of this betrayal, of this ultimate act of self-destruction, would forever mark my soul, a haunting reminder of the fragility of love and the brutal cost of its destruction. In the flickering light of the flames, the future stretched before me, bleak and unknowable. A landscape of grief and shattered dreams, of memories forever tainted by the specter of betrayal. But even in the depths of my despair, I clung to the faintest glimmer of hope, the desperate, aching need to find meaning in the ashes, to forge a path forward, no matter how painful and uncertain. For in the end, it was all I had left, the fragile, stubborn persistence of the human spirit, the refusal to let even the most devastating of betrayals extinguish the last embers of resilience. And so I rose on shaking legs, the heat of the blaze at my back, and turned to face the long, hard road ahead, a journey of healing and self-discovery, of learning to trust again, to open my shattered heart to the possibility of a future beyond the ruins of my once cherished past. It would not be easy. The wounds of betrayal ran deep, carving scars that would never fully fade. But in that moment, watching the home we had once shared crumble to ashes, I made a silent vow to honor the love we had once known, even as I grieved its loss. To find a way to forgive, not just Lauren but myself. To rebuild my life, brick by shattered brick, until I could once again stand tall in the face of the unknown. The path ahead was shrouded in shadows, the echoes of my anguished cries still ringing in the smoke-filled air. But I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that I would not let this be the end of my story. For even in the darkest of nights, there is always the promise of a new dawn, a chance to rise from the ashes, to find hope and healing amidst the shattered remnants of a life forever changed. And it was that promise, that flicker of resilience, that I clung to as I walked away from the smoldering ruins of my past, ready to face whatever the future might hold. One step at a time, one breath at a time, I would find my way back to the light.